So something's not right. Hey, everybody. Let's see if we have people pouring into the room here. Got a little bit of a funky late start there. Here we go. Okay, let's see. Here we go. Oh my gosh, there's Vera and Tamina and Cheryl and Liliana. Hey, Sherry Godfrey, this is so exciting. So I'm just waiting for Erica to meet us in the room. There she is. Whoa.
Hey there.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. It's delightful to see you.
Same.
Got some folks pouring in here, and I just opened the webinar room, so I want to give a couple minutes, and then
Awesome.
I'm going to do the amazing feat of going live in 2 places at once on Facebook. And you know, I am very technically challenged. All the women in who are in my groups know that. So you'll suffer through that with me, but Vera is here to help. I can see that she's here, so that's awesome.
No worries. We'll be fine.
How you doing? I love your scarf.
Thank you. I am trying to be warm. I was not feeling well yesterday and I'm going in and out of it today, but then my kids don't feel well. So I'm like, all right, guys, we got to figure this out.
Man, I know, huh? That's the way it goes. It goes in circles. I took vacation last week. In between programs, ended one program before the start of the next, and spent my whole vacation in bed. I think my body was just like, oh, we have a vacation, let's shut down now, right? So, you know, it is what it is, right?
Like, come on.
I know. Okay, so I'm gonna go live here.
Okay.
I'm gonna take a chance and go live. We are recording too.
Woohoo.
Let's see. Live on Facebook. It's never as easy as it sounds, is it?
You would think that they would make things like that easy.
Well, you know, and we tested it several times today too. So I think I have it open twice is the problem. Here we go. Share to my news feed. All right. So then I think once I go live, Vera will take it over on Facebook from there, and she's gonna share also inside the posse.
I'm like, that is definitely above my pay grade. I have nothing to contribute.
Well, you know, I got to tell you, Erica, this was today as Vera and I were testing, she said, go ask Christian, right? Who's my 19-year-old son. We figured he would know better than either one of us how to do it in both places at once. But then I said, no, boys don't do Facebook, right? They do Snapchat. So if we were broadcasting on Snapchat, they'd be able to get us there. But okay, so Vera, we're live. I'm not sure why that picture's there. There we go. All right, so Vera can take that from there, and then she'll feed questions back into the chat. Awesome. Woohoo! Mission accomplished.
Yay!
So Erica, I want to have you kind of introduce yourself to the audience first a little bit, but you and I have been working together now for a few months, and you've helped me through some bumps and some stumbles along the road. But can you tell everybody what you do and a little about your podcast and how they can find you and interface with you?
Absolutely. So my name is Erica Courdae. I'm extremely happy to be here. And as Juju mentioned, she has given me the honor of having been able to be her coach and consultant for the past few months. And I typically do most of my coaching and consulting through the lens of DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, one of the things that makes me different is that I do believe that you want to take care of the whole human. So it's not just the work. It's life. It's all the things. And I do this from a place of wanting you to be better And so I do not bring shame and blame into what I do. So it's an open space to figure out how to be better. And it is a safe space, yet I am going to encourage you to be brave. So you can come on over to my website, ericacourdae.com, and you can learn more about the one-on-one coaching that I do, what it looks like to have me come in and do workshops like this, either one-on-one with your group or in a large live way, kind of like this is going out on Facebook, or our podcast, which is Pause on the Play, where we do have these types of conversations and we talk about where myself and my co-host, Andrea Jackson, so where visibility and marketing meets, and we have conversations around it that will give you an opportunity to figure out whether or not we're a good fit for you. And you can learn more about us and everything we do at Pause on the Play over at pauseontheplay.com.
And you talk about hard stuff there.
Oh my gosh, yes. Like we are, it's not just like, well, I mean, what do you think? It's like, no, we want to actually do some things. So what's happening here?
It's hard
Absolutely.
stuff. Yeah.
Well, and it's necessary, because the reality is that I'm very fortunate that I have people that want to make changes, not for themselves alone, but like I want the world to look different and I want to better myself as a human, but I want to contribute to changes that are going to actually create equity, things that are going to make this world look different than what it did yesterday. And so that awareness and that desire to do something different and to be something different is something that, it really is an honor that people are like, I want you to witness me doing this. I want your support. I'm willing to be vulnerable with you and to know that, like, I'm not going to beat you over the head with the, why didn't you know better?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to do that.
And you know, that's really interesting. You and I had a conversation about that not very long ago, about this kind of interesting balance between, I want to do something, right? I want to make a change. What do I do? I want to do something. I need to make a difference. And you know, you kind of said back to me, listen, if you really want to do something, you're part of a much bigger ecosystem, right? And it's not just you that needs to do something, the world needs to do something, we need to change. And the first thing that you recommended to me was that I listen before I did anything. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because that was a week. I'm gonna touch a little bit on how you and I came together, but that wasn't such an easy thing for me to stop talking and start listening.
Well, and you said that, and so I could feel that energy of like, I don't want this to be this way. I want to fix this. What can I do? And I think part of it could simply just be you as Juju. The other part is also that I think often as women, let alone in a leadership role, like we don't want to see something and leave it there. So we're trying to figure out how to fix. And very often the types of things that people would come to me to want to fix aren't fixable in that way. It's not, here's the Band-Aid, go do this, or, oh, just go, talk to this person and get the answer and boom, you're good. And so it really does come from a place of first having to ask a question, but then go quiet long enough to actually allow somebody to give you the answer. And not just like that first little thing that they'll say, but that place where somebody says, well, this is how I feel. And and then all of a sudden you get the avalanche. That's where you're getting the pieces that often people don't pause long enough to not only let the person actually feel comfortable enough to say it, but then to hear what they said. And to not feel like, okay, let me put my cape on and go fix it. It's just kind of like, and I think we talked about, like, in a relationship, if you have one partner that's like, great, I'll go fix it. I didn't say I needed you to fix anything.
Right.
And so this is where you do have to stop and first hear what it is that's being said and whether or not there's actually something that's being asked of you to do in that moment, or if it's really being asked of you to have that awareness that you didn't have before. Because you can't go gangbusters and trying to bust things up until you understand what and why and how. Where are we going?
And in order for women to talk to me, so when I sent out the email about this and made the post about this, I talked about womanism versus feminism. And I know that, feminism was hijacked by white women long ago, and there are a lot of women left behind, a lot of intersectionality that really didn't get covered. And there's just so many aspects to being a woman. And in order for me to be able to listen to women and have them really talk, I have to create a space that's safe for them to do that. They need to feel safe in order to speak up in that way. So I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about what a safe space is, and how people, what makes people feel safe?
Well, I want to go back for a second and just acknowledge the fact that part of the reason why people don't even always realize whether or not a place is safe is because they've gotten so conditioned to it not being safe. And I would love to be able to say that feminism was hijacked. Feminism was created by white women in the KKK. And so, it was never created to serve the intersectionality of women.
I never knew the
And
KKK piece.
mhm, yep. And so it was more of that kind of, okay, white men are at the top of the hierarchy, and feminism was a way to fight for white women to be able to at least stay at number 2 on the totem pole, so to speak. And I try to pull totem pole out from it. That's not the best word to use, but in the hierarchy standpoint. Um, and so that kept them at a point of, we are more than Black women, Black men, Asian women, Asian men, Native American women. And at that point, obviously, being non-binary or just not identifying at all is something that wasn't even a thing. And so many people were conditioned that safety is a privilege. And so that place to be able to acknowledge to yourself how you feel, let alone to verbalize it to someone else, and to be able to have your needs met is something that, and I speak as well from experience, that for a very long time, and it's something that I'm deconditioning with myself, that I can not only want, but I can speak those wants and I can expect for them to be fulfilled, whether that's from me or from someone else, because I deserve to have my needs met.
Yes.
And so there's something to be said for people that didn't know that that was a thing, and then to kind of come into a space and figure out, what does it mean to be in a safe space? So someone's actually listening to me. I can speak up if I don't, feel the optimum way about something. Um, can I actually want? Can I ask for something different? And can I be brave enough to ask that others meet me in those actions, whether that means that they are doing more, they are doing something differently, or simply listening. But being able to create space that those things are possible and that people believe that they're possible. Because so much of it is being able to get out of that place that I can't have this. This isn't for me. I don't have access to it. And so there's a lot of, unlearning and deconditioning that comes into being able to be receptive to what you are holding and creating this space for them to be able to do. So sometimes it's you doing it, and sometimes it's them believing that it's not a mirage.
And you just said a really important word, I think, that has become clear to me through our work together, and that's access. Right. So I know in the spring, in the wake of the George Floyd outrage and everything that was going on, there was a lot of talk about privilege. And I dove deep into the books like everybody else did, and was talking to you and talking to other people about the changes that I could make. And it was all around the idea of privilege. But access is something that you introduced me to that's really obvious, I think, if you don't have it, and not obvious if you do. So can you talk a little bit about access and how we share it and how we make things accessible to other women, and how do we broaden that?
I think when it comes to that, one of the first places is acknowledging what access can look like, and then being able to acknowledge where you have an abundance of it and where there are possible deficiencies. Like, what can that feel like? And so I want to acknowledge that, first of all, if you hear me talk about privilege, and this is, Juju, you know this, but for those that don't know, I don't speak about privilege from a place of, oh, privilege is white privilege. Privilege is you having easy access to something that someone else doesn't. And so privilege can be, do you have access to education? Do you have access to healthy food? Do you have access to financing if you're running a business? Do you have access to quality medical care? Do you have access to literally money? And so access shows up, and I give you those because those are very tangible examples that makes it easy to kind of grasp it. But access is basically that thing that you don't think about. Oh, well, if I walk into a restaurant, I know someone's going to see me and seat me. I
Yeah.
know that if I go in the bank, someone is willing to sit down and have this conversation with me. I know that if I want to start a business and I put my face on it and I look, this particular type of way, and a good example would be young, white, heteronormative, cisgendered, tall, blonde, normatively pretty. You're going to get a specific type of response. And so that's a level of access. And so who doesn't have the same level of access to education? Who doesn't have the same level of access to funding? Who doesn't have the same level of access to safety and security in the body that they live in? And so access is really realizing, like, these are things that I take for granted.
Yes.
Where can somebody else not do that same thing? And so in some cases, it's teaching people about, if you do finance, this is what it looks like to have different avenues that you can go down to find funding. If you are working with business coaching and you have webinars or events come up, I'm going to defer my seat to someone that comes from a marginalized group because everyone else here looks, lives, and loves just like I do. And it needs to be more diversity here. Creating possibly award seats in your programs or your offerings that allow someone to have access to it if it supports them and you have a safe space to welcome them in so that they are able to benefit from what you offer. And when I say award seats are not always about the fact that you can't financially be able to pay for something. Sometimes it's because someone is doing something that there needs to be more of it. And you want to facilitate more people seeing and having access to what they do. And they simply need a platform. Platform is a huge piece of privilege and access.
Mm-hmm. And
Networking.
we have talked about
Yes.
that. And a lot of women in this room today have a platform because that's what I teach, is how to build a platform. So this idea that we literally have access to bodies and seats, right? We have access to people hearing our message, and platforming someone else's message is a really an amazing way to do that, isn't it? To
Correct.
let them get it out there.
Correct.
So you and I, we talked a little bit about ageism, and that's something that I've been talking about for a long time. And so the idea that the world sees something about me that is not necessarily true, right? That the world put on me. I'm very in touch with the idea that the world believes that as women, the older we get, the less we're worth. And, we feel tossed out. And I've talked to midlife women about that for so long. But I think one of the things that I wasn't really aware of is that my experience, I never leaned into the awareness that my experience of that versus the experience of women who don't look and love and live like me, that there's this myriad of ways that women are experiencing midlife. And that kind of blew up my brand a little bit in terms of where I was blind. We talked about speaking it aloud, right? And I want to have you circle back to this because I think this is something really important for women. And that is this idea that I'm not conditioned for it to be okay for me to want. And you touched on it a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how frightening it is to say out loud what I want? And if someone says that in my space, it's not necessarily my job to give it to them, is it? But to help them figure it out. Can you talk to that a little bit?
First of all, I appreciate you saying just the fact that it's not always up to you to give it to them. In some ways, it's just making the path that they can get to it themselves. And it's a very layered thing. And it really does start with the fact that you have a hard time acknowledging it to yourself. Because again, if you're someone that grew up with any type of narrative around, um, be grateful for what you have, as if it's not okay to want more, or that you're being ungrateful because you're not just content with whatever somebody gives you. Or if somehow, I don't know, you were given red and you wanted blue, and it comes off as like, oh my gosh, what's
Yeah.
wrong with you? Why are you not okay with it? Or again, why are you not appreciative? Like, I don't have to give you anything.
Yeah.
And so we have a hard time even wrapping our brains around wanting. And then when it comes time to actually put words to it, there are times when our bodies sometimes will literally not let us speak it. So if you've ever heard someone, like, they get really quiet, or they kind of hold their head down, you see their body start to
Yeah.
contract, or they almost are kind of squeaking it out. And there is this real physical resistance to saying, I want, fill in the blank, because there's this feeling of, again, is it safe to want? Am I deserving of receiving? Because if you've experienced something or someone telling you that you're not, you have somehow possibly internalized that as your truth. And it's not a fact. It is a truth that somebody tried to give you. A fact is like indisputable, concrete evidence, data. Truth, my truth, your truth, everyone's individual truth. There's a certain amount of processing that makes it your truth. And you sometimes have to go in and say, is this my truth, or is this the truth that somebody else told me I had to have? And being able to dig through that can put you at a place that you begin to find your voice and figuring out what you can use it for and what's possible. Because having access to possibility is another thing that, again, some people don't feel like they have.
And
And
that's
it's,
beautiful, that because as
yeah.
a leader, and especially as a leader with a platform, right, one of the things, I might not be able to give women what they want, but I can give them a different truth, right, which you said, which is that you deserve to have this as much as anybody else does, right, and you deserve the chance to
Mm-hmm.
speak aloud, and you deserve to be heard, and you deserve to be
Consider
seen,
this.
and
Think differently.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
So this brings us to a conversation that I've had with so many women, and really what led me to seek you out initially is that sometimes we get it wrong, right? And in our effort to move forward, we have all these stumbling blocks, right? So maybe sometimes it's around language. I'm not sure that I'm going to say this right. I'm not sure if I'm going to offend someone. I'm not sure if I'm going to be called out. And a little backstory, how Erica and I met is that I was running a program this summer, and had a woman in the program who I just care about so deeply. And she experienced harm in my Facebook group. And it was something in the moment that I saw, and it gave me pause. And I had this thought, well, if I address this here, I'm going to open a can of worms and it's going to make it worse, right? And I kind of let it hang there.
Right.
And in my absence, she filled it in. And ultimately what happened was she ended up leaving the group. And it was an incredible loss. And it really rocked the group. It was extremely disruptive in terms of, I think, all of our understandings about who she was. She was the only Black woman in the group. It was a group of all white women and one Indigenous woman and one Black woman. And I knew in that moment how wrong I had gotten things and how much I wanted to recover, and that I had work to do. But I had to recover to that place of commitment. And I wonder if you would talk a little bit about that, because it's the one thing that I've learned throughout the summer is that the key to all of it is really being willing to keep to sometimes get it wrong, but to stay committed and keep returning to commitment, because it's in the doing that we learn, right?
It is. And people are so afraid to do it wrong. And I guess I have such a hard time in my head understanding what it is about, anything that is around diversity, equity, inclusion, or anti-racism that really does have people at this place. I mean, I understand technically, but what is it that makes it so challenging to be willing to try? And I always think about, like, if a toddler's trying to walk, he's, he or she or they is not going to say, this whole walking thing, this is a little hard. I'm just
Yeah.
going to keep falling. I'm going to stay on the floor.
I tried it 3 times and I'm done. Yeah.
Right. Never mind. I'm just not going to do it. And if you really look at children and the level of resiliency that shows up when they fall, they stumble, they break, they bruise, they bump, all of these things, and they keep going. And yet, I don't know that I would say that walking is easier than this. I mean, that's an entire skill that if you are, capable of doing that, to be able to learn that, that's a thing.
Yeah.
And so this entire place of, I got it wrong, I'm going to stop. I might get it wrong, I'm going to stop. I'm not sure if I did, but I feel weird and I just don't know anymore.
Yeah, I don't know what, so I won't say anything, right?
Right, and saying nothing is silent complicity.
Yes.
And so, like, if you think about it, if you saw, 2 people and one partner was being physically abused, and you said, I don't know what to do, and you don't do anything, well, you let this person be beaten. And so silent complicity is that's a whole statement. And so there has to be this place of, if everything else in my life, particularly if you have your own business, like, you have jumped into something like, I have no idea what this is going to look like.
Yes.
And if there's that willingness there to figure it out, there has to be that same willingness to say that I'm willing to listen, I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to lend my voice when it's helpful and not overshadow others. I'm willing to use my platform and my privilege, as a support system for change. But there has to be this place that just because you don't know and don't excel, and keep going. Like, there has to be a bigger reason of self, I think, to return to, as you said.
And Pamela asked an interesting question here that you and I had talked about before, and I wanted to bring up today. And she said, as part of the silence due to fear of blowback, right? And you and I had this conversation that was a perfect analogy around having a fight with your spouse, right? So, you have a fight with someone who you love, and, you've transgressed or you've done harm to this person, and you want to make up for it. And what you really want is for the anger to go away, right? So now the doing begins because the anger is uncomfortable. And so now, I'm going to buy you flowers, or I'm going to do this, or I want to have a conversation, and I want it all to end because it's uncomfortable for me. But what I don't allow is the space for you to be angry about what happened. And I think there's a lot of fear in that space. And you and I talked about that. Can you talk to that a little bit about the fact that things don't go away just because we're making space for discussions around them?
No. And to have that need in you for something to go away really does come from a place of not having the capacity to be uncomfortable.
Correct. Yeah.
You are just unwilling to be there. And so you expect this other person somehow to absorb what has happened and to keep moving and to bypass any of their processing of it and to just go on to what's next. And so, this happens often when people are like, well, I mean, let's just move to things being better. Why are we still talking about this? And I had a family member, unfortunately, that created a lot of harm in my life growing up. And they were very much like, well, the past is the past. And I'm like, that's the wrong answer.
Yeah, it is the wrong answer, right? That is correct. Yes.
Right. And so that place of having to understand that you can't expect someone else to speed up your discomfort and somehow speed through their processing. That's just not what happens. And so when you have something that actually has, generations full of trauma with it, and hurt and pain and disenfranchisement. And it's like, well, I mean, but I didn't do it. Does that change the fact that this is what I'm in? It's just like, again, go back to the domestic violence. I didn't hit you, but you didn't stop this other person from hitting me either.
Right. And nor should you tell me to get over it, that it didn't happen. Right. Even if
Correct.
I wasn't there, if it happened to you and I want to provide you access to what I have, listening to you and helping you say what you want out loud is how I help you get there. Correct.
Right. And that's where you have to let me be who I am and how I am and process the way that I need to. And so you can't say, well, you can be here, but I mean, you have to get up to speed. I mean, you have to let it go. You have to keep moving. And it's like, ultimately, we all know that we want to keep moving forward. Momentum is the goal. And I can't tell you how you have to process your trauma. I
Yes.
can't tell you how to process the harm that you've received or what it's supposed to be. How important is it, trauma with a big T or little t? Like, how important is this supposed to be? Like, because at that point, now you're saying, well, I'm going to take it. Now I'm going to kind of internalize this as like, I kind of did it too, because I'm telling you it's okay. And
Yeah.
so now you've now become a big part of this thing that I associate you with, that no, I'm not okay with it. And in order for me to be here and to be who I am and hopefully get to the next best version of me, you have to be willing to allow me to be the whole human that I am. And
And you
if that's not welcome here, I can't be here.
and you might not know how to talk through all your trauma and everything you've experienced either, right? I think this is another expectation that people are going to show up and we talked a lot about this summer about having someone teach you what to do through their trauma, which is this kind of double burden, right? It's work. And this is what happened in my group, really, was that someone was asked to do work around trauma they'd already experienced. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is an area of real ignorance. And at least it was for me. I was ignorant to what was happening. And then I was afraid, right? And just as you described it, I had to expand capacity to be able to sit in the fear and sit in the realization of what happened, to be able to make space for something different to happen next time. And what you told me was, you're not gonna reach a point when you're gonna be ready or you're gonna be done.
Nope.
This isn't a thing. It's a condition. It's a journey, right? We're always going to be doing this. So can you talk a little bit to that?
I think for a lot of people, they're looking for this place of, I'm prepared now. I've read enough. I've listened enough. I've learned enough. I've watched enough, like whatever, insert thing here. And there is no I'm ready space. It simply is just the doing and hoping that at that point, your current level of knowledge and intentions will get you there. But what happens is if you get it wrong, you have to say, I screwed up. I apologize. You have to make your amends. You have to then figure out how you can do it differently next time and keep moving. And what you kind of spoke to was what sometimes can look like the model victim. And a good example of that is Emmett Till's mother. So her son was murdered and she was not able to show being upset, wanting vindication. She simply had to hold her pain and then decide that I am going to put my son on display because I need you to see what you have done. And so she had to be not only the person that received the transgression, but the person that is now having to dole out the lesson. And it is a very difficult thing when you can't be emotional. You have to be put together. You have to be complacent. You have to kind of be quiet about it. But at the same time, this person is like, you can't feel how you feel. You can't be upset about it with me. And I need you to tell me what I did. So I have to feel hurt, and I have to now educate you. That's not a burden that's okay to put on someone. And so when that happens, it is very difficult because this is basically somebody saying, I don't feel like I'm ready and I need you to tell me. It's like, no, this is where you have to say that I tried. I screwed up. I apologize. And then you figure out what to do next. Don't put it on that person that educated for you. Don't put it on them to have to, well, you misunderstood me. No, definitely don't go there.
Mm-hmm.
And there has to be this understanding of your processing of things and your particular normal isn't a monolith. It's not the one and only way to do things. So you have to be open to understanding that someone else is going to think or feel or do it differently. And you have to hold space for that to be just as valid as yours and to have that respect for it.
And that's not a lesson about race. That's a lesson about relationships, about humanity, right? In terms of being in relationship with people, being in physical space with people, being in time with people, right? And seeing everything from our own perspective and making the assumption that our perspective is the experience that everyone else is having. And the one thing that I've learned is that, you know, history and context is what we need, right? To become educated around other people's experience. And that history and context is for us to go out and get. But the behavior around acknowledging the experience, that's a universal lesson. That's a lesson that happens, you know, everywhere in our lives, is this idea of I'm sorry and I see you and I'll do better next time.
So funny thing, I was conditioned in my young adulthood by a friend that whenever, if I would say I'm sorry, they would always say, you're not sorry, apologize. And that has always stuck with me. So I no
Oh,
longer,
that's
whenever,
yeah.
because you don't want to subliminally program yourself to think you're a sorry individual.
Interesting. So it's not about who I am. It's about what I'm doing. It's an action I'm taking.
Right. Because if we are so connected to say, this is who I am, then you are sometimes, you know, kind of indicating to yourself that, oh, I can't do anything differently because this is who I am. And so if this is an action, then the hope is that I can have a different action. And I think it's also important, as I'm kind of getting bits and pieces of the chat, which I can't keep up with all of it, so I apologize. Please don't anyone think I'm ignoring you. But that everything that we're discussing, this comes from what I've experienced, how I've supported people, what my experience has been being a living expert, being a Black woman, you know, in this life, and how I've supported you and how I sometimes support others, you know. And so this is by no means an end all be all to everything. This is not the only track that everything can go through.
Yeah.
There's so many nuances and layers to things. So I want to make sure that not only with what we're talking about, but anytime that you take in content along these lines, make sure that you leave some space there to understand that people are individuals. And again, we're not monoliths. And so I'm not speaking for every Black person. You're not speaking for every white woman. And so therefore, it's important to be able to kind of just get the themes and get the things that are important and that are resonating with you now, and allow this to be a part of your journey and your learning and not the only thing.
So that, you know, it's really interesting that you bring that up, that you're not every Black woman and I'm not every white woman, because that was my entree into this conversation initially, right? That you and I have talked about, is that I began to follow a lot of Black women's voices, especially initially on Twitter a couple of years ago, and stepped into a space, right, where somebody said something about white women, whatever, I don't remember what it was, and I entered the conversation, right, which was not my conversation to have, and said not all white women. And it, you know, from there, right, this explosion, and it was one of those moments, another moment where I got it wrong, right, and then went off, did my work, and started to listen. And it was a long time before I got involved in a conversation again, and I never got involved in a conversation again that wasn't my conversation. And I think that's a big part of it as well, isn't it? Is when is it your turn to talk, and when are you in it, and when are you not?
I think that is very valid. And I've been very fortunate and blessed that the community that my business partner, India, and I have and we talk about these types of things, somebody brought up something that I hadn't thought about, because again, this isn't my lived experience. And I think what you're speaking to is one of the tracks that can come up with it. And it was this concept of um, there's a place of beginning to learn about the harm that you can cause from being callous or careless with your words, not thinking about your actions. But then there's also harm that can be caused that you don't have the same level of effect on. You can't change the body that you're in. You can't change how people are going to respond to you because of that. You can't change the systems that are going to respond to you differently. And so there are these pieces that you are going to be complicit in that you can't not be complicit in.
Yes.
And yet what can happen is when something does go awry and harm is caused, there's this place of where it'll come up and that defensiveness will kind of want to well up. And it doesn't always come from a, well, it's not my fault or I didn't do it. It could just come from a place of individualism trying to somehow separate you from the
Yes.
system that you are a part of, whether you want to be or not. And so there's this place of wanting to remind people to take responsibility for what you can, and also understand that there is some harm that you can't negate simply because of just who you are and how you exist in this life.
Yes. Yes. And I think, and there's the difference between truth and fact.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So, ladies, I know there are people listening from different places. There are people listening on Facebook. If you have questions, you can put them in Facebook, and Vera will bring them into the Zoom room where we're at for a chat. The women who are here in the Zoom room, if you have questions for Erica, we'll put them up now as well too. I want to talk for a second while we're collecting questions about harm, because this is one of the things that you and I talked about early on. And I saw another woman entrepreneur who I respect and admire, Rachel Rogers, and she at one point she did a Facebook Live in a presentation, and she said, if you can't create a safe space for Black women, this was in the summer, stop selling your stuff to Black women. Don't sell things to Black women if you can't accommodate and make a safe space for Black women. And there was this notion of harm. And so I want to have you talk a little bit about what that is, because the opposite of a safe space, right, is doing harm or allowing space for harm. And we don't know, I don't think we always realize what harm looks like.
Well, and this goes again to that place of harm is not something that you can fully speak to what harm is for someone else. Because, for one person, they can think, I accidentally mispronounced your name and I apologize. For someone else, that can feel like just another little tiny chip in the armor that has happened repeatedly every day for every day that they've been here. And so what may seem like I made a mistake for someone else can feel just huge, because it's like, do I even matter?
Yeah.
And so it's, you can't decide what harm is for someone else or how large harm feels for someone else. I mean, because you can have someone else that's like, I don't care how you pronounce it. It's fine. Just don't call me that. And I'm fine. Like, I don't care. That doesn't matter to me. And you don't know. And so I think that there is a place of understanding and being in conversations to begin to learn what harm can look like, and consciously creating spaces that are created to minimize harm, to minimize intentional harm as much as possible. Because as I just spoke, there are some things that for some people, just seeing someone in the room that doesn't look like them can evoke certain feelings, because you never know what someone has gone through and whether or not they're even aware of how it impacted them. But on the other end, there has to be this place to say, I have consciously created a space that addresses things that I have been told by people that I trust and people that I have worked and partnered with, that this is a part of me being, an imperfect ally and stepping in here and trying to be better. And I also won't say that I have addressed every single thing that each of you may need. And so I want the door to be open if for any reason something happens, because the hope is that it doesn't.
Right.
But if
Right.
and when it does, this is something that I want you to know, that please bring this to me so that we can not only address it, but make changes. And if your space is created to handle it, let's address what restorative justice can look and feel like, so that not only the person that gave it and received it are a part of it, but also those that witnessed it can be included as well. Because
Yeah.
honestly, the people that speak up aren't usually the ones that you have to worry about as much. And I'm not saying that to minimize them, but I'm saying that because the people that didn't speak up are
Yes.
the ones that's like, what's being held that you are not being, given the opportunity to be privy to that intake.
Yeah, and one of the things that interesting in the wake of what happened this summer, as I circled back with the woman who left my group, she was talking about being the only one in the group. And it was interesting because when we first met, she said, I'm not sure if I'm ready to be in a group of all white women. And I was naive enough and ignorant enough about what I needed to do to create a safe space that I assured her that everything would be fine. You don't need to worry about it, right? Everything,
Right.
This is cool. And when we talked in retrospect, she said, if I hadn't been the only one, the only person who looked like me in the group, I might not have needed to speak up, because I might have been in community with other women who I could have shared it with, or who would have felt what I felt, but I was the only one. And this also goes back to making an effort to have a space that's diverse enough that people don't feel isolated or singled out, or like they're alone inside a group.
You definitely hope. And I think that, I say this as someone that has frequently throughout my life been the only Black woman in a space, or the only woman of color, or one of very, very few. And so I have been in places to where it didn't bother me to be there. And then I've had times where it didn't feel good. I've had times where, I've looked back and realized that, like, you tokenized the hell out of me. And I've realized that, unfortunately, one of the most recent ones was one that I was fortunately in there with someone else that I was connected with. And so when I really became conscious of the shift and the lack of safety in the room and the lack of desire to truly address what was going to make it safe, I was completely just like, oh, okay, I've addressed it. I've come to you with it, and you're not doing anything. And you want to hold on to this notion that you're better than you are. And so I'm leaving. And I didn't make a big to do. I just exited. And that was it. Because there was no conversation to be had at that moment. Now,
Erica,
I hope go ahead.
Talk about tokenism. Because you and I had a discussion about this summer as well, in terms of, this is one of the dangers, right, of moving forward and saying, okay, now I'm gonna do something, right, rather than listening. So I'm gonna do something, and now I'm gonna go out and I'm going to avail myself, right, to all different kinds of women. And what you warned me of is, be very careful that you don't either intentionally or unintentionally tokenize someone. So talk about that a little bit, because I think it was a really direct and important lesson.
So in the situation that I was in, the person was literally utilizing me as the only Black person that they were working with. And so I felt like I was just kind of being plastered up. However, that it isn't always that direct. And the conversation that we were having was more in the heels of the fact that after the murder of George Floyd, white women were called up to do things differently.
Yes.
And so they were called up to do things that did create equity. And what can happen is, in some of these situations where you are actually, going through actions that are meant to create equity, everyone that sees you coming isn't going to be happy, because there is this, and this is where the contradictions come in. Because there are times to where it's like, yes, you need to offer more to Black women. And then if a group of Black women is like, wait, why is this white woman coming in here? Like, are you only doing it because I'm Black? I don't know how I feel about this. And it's like, yes, you should. And there are going to be some people that are going to have a hard time for themselves reconciling whether or not you're doing this for the right reasons or if it's because you're told to do so. And even if you're told to do so, whether or not they can see enough in you that actually wants to do better and is simply having to do whatever you need to right now because I'm struggling and I don't know what else to do. And so I have to start somewhere. I really do want to be better. And again, going back to the example of kids, like, you're not going to be like, you won't just stand up and walk.
Yeah.
What is the problem
Exactly.
here?
Yes.
And so that doesn't negate what you're experiencing. And it also doesn't negate what those women that see you coming may be experiencing. Because just as real as your desire is to be better, it is equally as real for them to feel like a whole lot of people said the same thing before, which is how a whole lot of us got put on a boat and taken halfway across the world.
Yep. And my capacity to sit in the discomfort of the fact that they may not choose to respond to my offer, right? And that it's a practice, a long-term practice, and that it takes time and it takes demonstration, right?
Yes.
That's where the work is, and staying in the intention becoming real over time.
Yes, because I think that all of us really do genuinely hope that when people seek to be better, that it comes from a virtuous place.
Yes.
And being that we're hot off the heels of an election where half the country requested one thing and the other half requested something else, maintaining that divide is not going to create any type of healing. Now, that does not mean that you need to go to the person that had the flag for the other side on their front and go knock on the door. However, there has to be this place of beginning to kind of hear some of the motivation, because there was an example of a woman that they tried to say was a part of voter fraud, in which she wasn't, but a statement that she made really stood out to me. And she said, I didn't so much vote for this person as I voted against the other person. And that really stood out to me. And it really spoke to the fact that, like, this person is acknowledging the fact that they made the best possible choice they could based on what they had access to. And so when you are in a place of being willing to go across boundaries to try to have conversation with someone that you would think we have nothing in common, we're not standing for the same things.
Yes.
Is that true or not?
Yes. Yes. And I think, the election is I think it's a really interesting place to start. And I talked to several of my Black friends this weekend about this idea of making amends, right? And reaching across the aisle. And I saw so many posts around, we need to get to know this voter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then still this idea of, well, wait a minute. Now you're going to ask me, right, to reach across here and understand the other side of racism, right? Or the other side of, and it's just, it's an awfully big jump. And I think we misunderstand what it means to heal over time, or to find ways to come together. It's not about compromising or giving in as much as it is making space for longer term change.
Well, and there has to be a place to where you can have differing opinions, but also understand that there is a difference between not agreeing on how something is done, and it is another on disagreeing on whether or not something actually provides safety and security for everyone.
Yes.
And so this is not to say that you need to bend on things that, you feel like you are diametrically opposed to being okay with in someone else. But it's about figuring out where that common ground is. You're not going to have all common ground with anyone, and you're not going to have all the same common ground. And so it really has to come from a place of finding something there to say this matters. And at the end of the day, if you can find a way to start there, then that's helpful. And, the really challenging thing right now is that 2020 has has brought up the racially charged side of things in a way that everybody was, we were all captive volunteers in watching this happen. We were all home for the most part.
Yeah.
And we were watching this. And so all of a sudden it was like, wait, this is a thing. And it's like, yeah, it's been a thing. And at the same time, you know, there's a number of people that are not yet at that point that they can see that things that maybe they are in support of, that if this then that, like we talked about, like you can't help but to be a part of this, and understanding what comes with this. And you are not going to get anyone's attention by yelling at them. Now, is there a time and a place for everything? Yes. Because I'm not someone that is fully, you know, from that place of like, oh, it has to be all completely nice and that respectability politics type of piece. But I also don't think it's like, you know, everything is meant to be a fight, because most people are not really motivated in that way.
Yes.
And so when it goes in that way, that doesn't necessarily work. Now, I think there's a time and a place for everything. And this just happens to be the majority of how I do things. However, the biggest challenge is that nobody's talking, nobody's listening. There's a lot of yelling at each other. There's a lot of just anger. And that's just going to make us implode. Like, that doesn't help forward movement or momentum in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't help understanding. Is there a reason for the anger? Absolutely. Is it justified? Is it there for a reason? It is. It absolutely is. But there has to be a place to be able to listen to figure out what's next.
What's next? And that, and, you know, I'm glad you said what's next, because one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is, you know, for the women in the audience who really want to be womanists, right? Who really want to support women, you know, in every form. What advice would you give right now around what's next?
I think there's a number of things. I'm always going to go back to listen and to be in conversation with people, because I think part of understanding the intersectionality of being women or identifying as a woman is being able to understand that your particular experience as one is not the only experience, and that there's so many other nuances that someone else is going through that you need to be able to create space for. And so, like, I usually frame that as reconsider your normal. So I think that kind of starting there is a huge part of it. And that helps for you to be able to just understand that there are other concepts and realities that exist at the same time as yours, that being able to witness and validate that is a huge part in shifting, because then you can say, oh, wait, okay, there's a problem here. I can see this, and I can see how this isn't okay existing in this way. And so starting there, I think, is really helpful. And again, if we don't talk, we don't listen, we don't learn.
Yeah, and that's a practice, right? We have to seek that out. It's not like we're waiting for, you know, to stumble upon somebody who's having a different experience. You have to go out and find that.
Yes.
And I think, you know, that's back to what we were talking about earlier, is going out and finding it and watching that experience happening, and then deciding, when do I enter this conversation, right? At what point am I close enough in relationship with someone that I've developed this space of trust where I can talk about these things, right? And that's a tender spot too.
Especially for people that have spent their entire lives being misunderstood, because what was real for them was not the same as the narrative that was told about them.
Yes.
So allowing people to reclaim what their narrative is and being able to receive that from them and understanding that, that's huge.
Yeah, it really is. It really
privilege,
is.
Again, that privilege, that access. Can I tell my own narrative? Can I tell my story?
I saw that around voting too. I saw people who were talking about, you know, in conversations online and things like this about, well, I'm not going to vote, or I'm going to vote on this issue. And then responses from people who would say what a privilege it is, right? To know that no matter which way you vote, you'll be fine.
Yep.
And so this lived experience, that coming to the point of, at what point am I making decisions or taking actions that include humans outside of myself?
Well, and being willing to understand that it's not always about me, and being willing to understand that I always go back to, like, it's not pie. Like, it's not about, oh, if
Yeah.
you get, then I'm going to lose. It's like, oh,
Yes, yes,
no.
that's a great point. It's not pie, is it? No, and some things we don't run out of, and dignity is one of them, right? There's enough dignity to go around for everybody, isn't there?
So there's no reason to rob someone else and deny them of it.
Correct. Correct. That. It's really interesting because we talk about love that way in our house, and that's one of the things that I had said to my son from the time he was really young is you can love as many people in your life as you want and let as many people love you because you never will run out of it, right? And I think there's a real mentality, and I've noticed it in America more than I've noticed it other places of this pie issue, right? If you get yours, I'm not going to get enough of mine, and then there becomes this strange stinginess.
It's ownership because you want to own and to possess. And so somehow if someone else owns or possesses something, what does that say about you? How does that impact you? What do you lose? And it's just like if somebody is in a relationship with someone and then they're no longer with them. It's like, well, I lost something. I don't own that anymore. And it's like, well, you never did.
You never did.
It's not yours to own.
So aside from listening, what other advice would you give us?
Be in action. So if you are clear, and if you're not clear, be clear on who it is that you seek to be an imperfect ally for. And imperfect because you're not going to get it always perfect, but ally in that I want you to have, the same type of easy, open and free access that I have to things. Who is that? And then be in action for that. Speak up when something comes up. Shop in a way that is ethical as much as you can. We're not perfect. Do what you can.
Talk about that a little bit, about what that means.
I feel like that comes from the place of shopping at places that you have a little bit more awareness of, like, the supply chain. Like, it's kind of like the difference of, like, I'm going to buy everything from Amazon versus like, what's the local business that I want to keep moving, especially at a time like this, especially in like businesses, kind of doing things in a way that, like, I'm aware of what I'm doing and maybe it costs me a few extra dollars, but I know where my money is going. I know what my money is supporting. Just kind of seeing where you can continue to be better. And so the biggest thing is just wherever it is that you want to improve, what is one thing I can do right now? And just kind of being able to continue building on that. It doesn't have to be moving mountains all at one time because these things didn't happen overnight. They won't disappear overnight, but it does need a collective shift of small actions that contribute to the larger whole.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful for your generosity with me this summer and your patience and your honesty, and really grateful that you were willing to come talk to the women who matter to me, because it clearly matters to them.
I appreciate that you were willing to listen and to be in that conversation and to create a space that we are all here having this conversation and allowing, all of these people to witness us being in this conversation and to be vulnerable about, the different iterations that you've gone through as, you as an individual and what you've worked through with me. And everything that I do is because I hope that equity is fostered. So hopefully we can get to equality, and you're allowing me to continue speaking about my message. And for that, I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll keep listening to it. And for those of you who might not have come in right in the beginning, pauseontheplay.com is Erica's podcast. It's juicy, and she talks about this stuff and from every angle, all kinds of different ways. And Erica Courdae, you want to spell your last name for everybody?
COURDAE.com. So it's ericacourdae.com, pauseontheplay.com. And the podcast is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to your podcast goodness.
Right on. All right. And you and I will be continuing this conversation for a long time.
Yes, ma'am. And I'm grateful for you.
Back at you. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Talk soon.
Okay.